It began with a sentence that seemed to silence even the sharpest critics of the commission. "I deny any involvement in the Blue Light saga." Those words, spoken clearly by Julius Mkhwanazi, rippled through the hearing room like a sudden draft of cold air. No hesitation, no trembling voice, just a firm disassociation from a scandal that had dominated whispers for weeks. And yet, before people could absorb the weight of his denial, he calmly added something that shifted the entire mood. An admission that he shared close, long-standing ties with the very man whose name kept threading through other testimonies. Matlala. The contradiction did not go unnoticed. It felt like the story had only just begun to unfold, and the commission members leaned forward, waiting for the layers to peel back on their own. And what followed was even more complex. Mkhwanazi's testimony moved between certainty and revelation, between distance and proximity, between denial and familiarity. There was something unusually compelling in the way he walked the line between what he refused and what he acknowledged. Those listening immediately sensed that the day's session would not end with simple explanations. Instead, it would deepen into the kind of narrative where relationships, influence, and public perception twist together like threads pulled from different fabrics. Somewhere in the middle of all this, an unexpected admission later in the session would turn the conversation in a direction few anticipated. And so the question arises, one that has echoed far beyond legal proceedings. Does closeness automatically imply influence? Can two individuals share a personal bond that has no political or operational significance? Many viewers of the hearing had their own answers, shaped by experience, bias, or intuition. But the commission demanded something more precise, clarity grounded in facts rather than assumption, and a narrative that could stand on its own without leaning on speculation. When the session moved into its deeper phase, the room seemed to settle into a kind of collective focus. Mkhwanazi was asked why, if he had nothing to do with the Blue Light episode, his name continued emerging in statements from various officers. His response was measured. He explained that political prominence often makes one a convenient reference point, even when one has no operational control over the situation. There was a hint of frustration in his explanation, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that builds quietly when one believes they are being associated with events they did not touch. Commissioners examined the circumstances surrounding that particular day of the Blue Light saga. Testimonies had painted vivid scenes, flashing lights, rapid movements, hurried decisions. But when Mkhwanazi distanced himself entirely, it forced the commission to treat his account as a possible pivot point. A denial of involvement meant the focus had to shift toward how rumors grow and how names become linked to incidents without direct evidence. What drew even more attention, however, was the moment he openly acknowledged his relationship with Matlala. It wasn't an evasion. It wasn't a soft phrasing. He described their connection as close, long-standing, and built over years of political and personal intersections. The admission created an immediate tension in the room, because it raised the question of how much influence one person might have over the orbit of another, even without explicit instruction or involvement. A story emerged in the process, one not told as a confession, but as a window into political life. He spoke about friendships built in difficult campaigns, alliances formed in moments of crisis, and trust created long before either of them ever imagined facing the probing light of a commission. The narrative was almost relatable in its humanity, because anyone who has navigated a workplace, a community, or a team understands that certain relationships naturally hold more weight than others. But relationships do not always translate to operational control. That was the thread he emphasized repeatedly. He insisted that while he was close to Matlala, he did not cross into decision-making spaces that weren't his to occupy. Commissioners listened with the stiff stillness of people who have heard every version of political distancing, both the sincere ones and the rehearsed ones. And yet, something in his tone did not resemble a rehearsed narrative. The session then shifted toward the nature of contradicting testimonies. Witnesses had painted different pictures, some pointing to a dynamic of influence and others rejecting it outright. The commission found itself in the familiar position of navigating the fog of conflicting accounts. Mkhwanazi, for his part, remained steady in asserting that his name was dragged into the conversation by people who misunderstood or overstated his role. For a moment, the hearing drifted into a more philosophical tone. Commissioners probed whether proximity in politics could ever truly be neutral. The question lingered in the air without a definitive answer. The public often imagines power as a switch on or off, when in reality it behaves more like heat, invisible, variable, and felt differently by each person in the room. Mkhwanazi insisted he had no such heat in this matter, only a friendship being misinterpreted in a climate of suspicion. By the 8th section of the testimony, the hearing had become less about the blue light saga itself, and more about the ecosystem that allowed rumors and assumptions to thrive. His testimony created a new narrative for the commission to consider, one in which influence was more rumor than reality, and relationships were being stretched into political shadows they were never meant to cast. As the hearing progressed, there was a subtle shift in tone, as if both the commission and the witness recognized that they were stepping into terrain shaped just as much by perception as by fact. Mkhwanazi spoke candidly about how public life often traps individuals in narratives they did not author. In his view, the blue light saga had grown into a web of assumptions, and his name had been caught in it simply because of who he was associated with publicly. He illustrated his point through the lens of everyday situations. Just as people in workplaces are often judged by who they sit with at lunch or who they walk out of meetings with, political figures are judged by the company they keep. And sometimes, he said, that judgment stretches unfairly into areas where the truth becomes secondary to the appearance of influence. The analogy struck a chord because it brought a high-level political issue into familiar human territory. The commission returned to the recurring name, Matlala. They asked why his name appears in multiple narratives and why his role in various political or administrative actions remained ambiguous. Mkhwanazi clarified that Matlala was a man he trusted, a man he supported, and a man whose political journey often intersected with his own. But he refused to accept the suggestion that this proximity implied shared actions or shared intentions in the blue light controversy. When pressed about public trust, he spoke about how narratives often gain power simply through repetition. Once a story is repeated enough times, people no longer question its origin. They only debate its meaning. In his view, his denial had to compete with a rumor that had already taken on a life of its own. The commissioners then focused on the atmosphere in which officers and public servants operate. They questioned whether certain individuals felt compelled to act or to claim they acted because of perceived expectations from political figures. It was a difficult question, not because of its content, but because of its breadth. Influence, after all, is not always explicit. It can be imagined, projected, or inferred. Mkhwanazi maintained that he issued no instructions, direct or indirect, relating to the controversial day. As the session deepened, media reactions outside the commission became part of the discussion. Headlines had framed his appearance in bold contrasts. Denial versus admission, distance vs closeness. The public conversation had already been shaped before he even took the stand. And in many ways, his testimony became an attempt to reclaim his own narrative from the interpretations circulating beyond the walls of the hearing room. What surfaced next was a reflection on loyalty. Not the loyalty demanded, nor the loyalty enforced, but the kind born naturally from shared experience. Mkhwanazi insisted that loyalty to a friend should not automatically be mislabeled as complicity in their actions. Yet in political landscapes, such distinctions often blur. The 14th passage of the unfolding testimony revealed something else. While denying operational involvement, he acknowledged that political environments are built on interlocking relationships that are easily misunderstood by outsiders. What looks like a chain of influence from the outside may be nothing more than the residue of shared history inside. And by the time the 16th section emerged, the Commission was increasingly aware that this narrative was not merely about facts, but about the complex architecture of public life, where clarity is rarely achieved in straight lines. The testimony moved into deeper emotional territory when he discussed the burden of being misrepresented in public discourse. His frustration was not explosive, but his words carried the weight of someone whose identity had been shaped by headlines he did not write. Commissioners listened quietly as he spoke about the cost of having one's character filtered through rumors and agendas. Then came a moment that reshaped the room again. He explained how critical it is for the Commission to distinguish between what witnesses believe and what witnesses know. This distinction, he argued, is at the heart of every inquiry. People may testify based on feelings, assumptions, or impressions rather than direct knowledge. And in the case of the Blue Light Saga, He insisted that much of what tied his name to the event belonged to this realm of impression rather than fact. As the session drew to its final stretch, the commission seemed to carry the weight of everything it had heard. The testimony had been a journey through denial, admission, clarification, reflection, and the complexity of political relationships. Mkhwanazi had insisted throughout that his conscience was clear, and that his role in this narrative had been overstated, misinterpreted, or magnified by people who mistook proximity for power. The hearing ended not with dramatic outbursts or sudden revelations, but with a quiet recognition that the truth, in matters like these, often hides between what was said and what was understood. And as observers looked ahead to future sessions of the Madlanga Commission, the sense lingered that the intersection between influence, friendship, and public responsibility would continue to unfold in ways no one could fully predict.